afternoon and welcome to yet another dialogue hosted by Canrad and Cass. My name is Yandisa Chubase and I'll be your facilitator for today's dialogue. It is our greatest apologies that we have started a little bit late, but we are Africans after all. So we are going to get started. Please do make sure that your mics are switched off, the ones that are in front of you, and you listen attentively. We're going to ask the director of Canrad, Prof. Ngobezulu, who's going to come and just give us a welcome and also just talk about the purpose of today's program. If you're not sure what the title of today's program is, it forms part of the greater dialogues of the South African youth perspectives, and today we're talking about the energy crisis and its impact. So without wasting any time, let's give over to Prof to come and welcome us. Can we give him a round of applause?
Molweni, ni right? Yeah, I'm also okay. Yeah, no, I was just saying I can't start before Sis Nancy is back. Yeah, otherwise I'll be fired, or I'll be called to the office to explain myself. Why did you start before Sis Nancy was back? Ladies and gentlemen, as the program director was saying, we apologize for the late start. There is a text that was directed to a wrong place, but now it has found its route. So it's coming, so they will find us as we continue because we are running behind schedule. We normally want to start our programs on time so that we don't delay exiting the stage, as it were. Nelson Mandela community, especially my dedicated Canrad team, Sipose to Sandy, who has made this possible by working relentlessly behind the scenes. There she is. Our esteemed partners, that is Conrad Adenauer Stiftung, abbreviated as CAS, represented here by Sis Nancy, who is the project manager. And of course, our youthful panelists, who will be joining us here. You'll see how young they are. Who will be taking us through today's discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, those who are here with us physically, as well as those who are joining us virtually. You are all welcome to this very important event, which in fact transcends our racial boundaries. So we are hoping that at the end of this discussion, we'll be better informed than we were when we came here. When we were planning today's event, we considered current issues that are topical and which also affect all of us, albeit in different magnitude. We were then concerned about a couple of topics, but we settled for the energy crisis, which is what we're going to be discussing today. Our decision was informed by the fact that this issue concerns all of us, although it affects us differently. For example, our politicians do not experience the impact of load shedding menace in the same manner that you and I do, and that is a fact. And then, of course, those of us who are at the university, including this one, we are privileged to have a backup system so that when power goes off, at least we are still able to function. This is not the case with a number of our townships and our rural areas, including my own rural area of Ingwavuma in far northern KwaZulu-Natal. We don't have any backup system, so when power goes off, we are stuck, we can't do anything. So that is how severe the situation can be. Although, of course, our institutions do have a backup system, but they have to cough up a lot of money in maintaining the generators, as you and I know how expensive diesel can be. Against this backdrop, we coined the theme for today's discussion as follows: South African youth's perspective on the energy crisis and its impact. Focusing on this theme, Focusing this theme on the youth was a deliberate decision which was informed by two factors. Firstly, when I joined CANRAD at the beginning of this year, I took a decision that no event will be organized by CANRAD without the youth getting involved in the discussions. And then, of course, CAS shares the same sentiment, which made our life easier when we cooperated with CAS, because they are also of the same view that if we want to build this country, we cannot build it by leaving the youth behind. Otherwise, we will be missing the point. If the youth does not participate in finding solutions to our endemic challenges, this country's future is doomed. Informed by this logic, we opted to invite these youngsters who will be addressing us today. And firstly, they must help us understand the country's energy crisis, how the country's energy crisis affects South Africans in general, but the youth in particular. And then secondly, they will assist us in finding some solutions to some of the problems that we are having, because our current predicament cannot be solved by politicians. It has become clear at the moment. It has become obvious to all of us that politicians have failed dismally to address the energy crisis, which is why we are then turning to the youth to assist us in this regard. In the main, they have not been telling the truth. They've been economical with the truth. At one point, they told us that the reason why we have load shedding is because of an inside job. There are people who are messing up with the processes at ESCOM. And at some point, they told us we are not having electricity because coal is wet. I mean, what kind of a reason is that? So there have been a number of reasons that have been given. So the reality is that they've been economical with the truth. We have now opted to bring the youth here to give us the way forward, with the understanding that they are the custodians of our future, and then they have to be part of finding a solution to the problem that we are currently facing. With those few words, you are all welcome, and I look forward to a robust discussion. Thank you very much, Program Director.
Thank you so much, Prof, for such a warm welcome, and also just giving clear context as to how and what came about when they were coiling this topic together. I think this is one topic that, in one way or the other, that all of us are always talking about, indirectly or directly. You know, we even joke and say we have favorite time slots when it comes to load shedding. Personally, my not so favorite one is between 6 and 8. But that is not the point. The point is that it is a very burning issue, and young people that are in this room are more than capable to really engage in the conversation and more so provide solutions. I am told that we have an online community that has joined us on YouTube. If you have anyone that would have really wanted to be here, but for whatever reason they are not here, please do share the live stream. It is on YouTube. You can also go to the Facebook page of CANRAD, and you will find it there. And we will be taking questions from the online community as well. All right, so I just want to sort of outline a little bit of how we're going to structure our program. We are going to now start with our panelists, right? Yeah, we're going to start with our panelists. We'll have a little bit of time for Q&A. Depending on the time and depending on the flexibility of both Prof and Nancy, we'll see how much appetite we can entertain for the question and answers. And then after that, we'll have Ms. Nancy, who's going to give the vote of thanks and just upcoming activities, and then we are going to close. Okay. But for now, can all the panelists, young intellectuals of our time, come up front, and can we give them a round of applause as they take their seats? Okay, so each of our panelists will have 10 minutes to give their input as to, what they prepared, and then each of them will go for 10 minutes, and then after that, we will then facilitate a question and answer and a little bit of a discussion in the room. So the first speaker for today is Ms. Thembelihle Mpungose. Ms. Thembelihle Mpungose is a provincial program evaluator in the KZN Office of the Premier, who conducts Office of the Premier evaluation, coordinates it at a provincial level evaluation studies conducted by the KZN provincial departments. State-owned, she also deals with state-owned entities and municipalities, particularly eThekwini Metro. She holds a master's degree in public administration with a specific focus on monitoring and evaluation for sustainability of development. Thembelihle Mpungose is a reputable practitioner who conducts evaluation in various programs, which includes poverty alleviation, unemployment, energy crisis, and many others. She's a policy and research specialist who has worked as a policy and research officer for the South African BRICS Youth Association, and also provides research and evaluation peer reviews for organizations such as the IEC and others as and when requested. She has written journal articles, conference papers, and presented in a number of conferences, both international and local. Help me welcome Ms. Thembelihle Mpungose.
Thank you very much, Program Director, for that warm welcome. My name is Thembelihle, as she has stated. I'm trying to open my laptop because I had prepared an entire PowerPoint presentation for you guys as we engage in this very interesting topic. Firstly, I would like to thank the university for inviting us. And secondly, I would like to thank my employer, KZN, Office of the Premier, for allowing me to honor this invitation. Thirdly, I would like to acknowledge and appreciate the team of young professionals in the Office of the Premier whom I worked with in a program that was looking at the impact of load shedding on job losses. I decided particularly to base my presentation on this project because I felt it would have a wider or broader perspective of youth, because we were young people doing this project. My presentation outline would have an introduction. It has a background, it has a core problem, it has high influence causes, it has institutional causes, outcomes, and recommendations. I'm not going to dwell much on explaining what is a crisis or what is energy, because I think we are here today because there is a crisis. We have identified that there is a problem, and that is why we're here. But before I go on with my presentation, let me give you guys a background of where I come from with my perspective. Firstly, South Africa is a country with a history of separate development. This separate development, we understand it as apartheid planning, which means that public services of the government of the time focused mainly in urban areas that were dominated by white minorities. However, upon advent of democracy, the democratic government sought to redress separate development. This included developing areas that were previously neglected by the apartheid government. This included developing jogging backwards to 19th century, where electricity was first introduced. A report presented by ESCOM showed that this was done without proper capacity assessment, if the country would be able indeed to electrify the whole country. This report also shows that they attempted to engage politicians to request increase of supply capacity as the demand was increasing. And also, they appealed to the leadership of Eskom, who did not take the problem serious when it was still reported. And in 2007, South Africa saw a rolling out of planned blackouts. This means that it's been 16 years since the problem started. We are here because there is a crisis. I do not know how long can an event last for to qualify to be a crisis. I don't know if 16 years later, is it still a crisis, or maybe this is just how we are going to live. These blackouts, they have a toll on the South African economy. As we continue to see decline in economic growth, loss of jobs, increased unemployment rates, and expensive cost of living. The people who suffer the most from these are those who are regarded as vulnerable, such as women, children, the youth, and those who are living with disabilities. The future of this country in the current economic state looks very blurry, and the anxiety is carried by the youth as they are the future of this country. I move now to what we profiled as high causes and medium causes of the problem that we are talking about today. The causes of the South African energy crisis include apartheid planning, as stated, lack of long-term sustainable planning by the democratic government, lack of political will to address the crisis, lack of sense of agency from the government's side, lack of adequate skills and capacity to convert the natural resources into energy at a larger scale, lack of advanced technological advancement to enable the country to explore other alternative sources of energy, and the non-proliferation treaty that was signed by South Africa to say we will not be coming into contact with the nuclear energy. Then we have medium causes, which I categorize them as the institutional causes, which is poor Eskom infrastructure. As Prof indicated, that we have been told that there are faults at Eskom, there's inside sabotage and all that. But when I looked at research, I found that there is poor Eskom infrastructure, illegal connections, cable theft, corruption at Eskom, poor leadership at Eskom, and lack of accountability. These things, they do contribute to the crisis that we have, even though we do acknowledge that Eskom is the solely supplier of energy in South Africa, meaning that maybe they do not have enough capacity to supply the whole country. As indicated in the background, that the outcomes of this crisis are carried by the South African economy. These outcomes include slow productivity, decline in economic growth, businesses shutting down, job losses, hopelessness, and poor work ethics. And the impact to this, I think this is where we are, and this is the point that we wanted to arrive at in organizing this event. The impact to this crisis that we are facing, it's poor socioeconomic status, it's poverty, it's increased crime rates, it's failing public institutions such as hospitals, it's mental health issues, it's substance abuse, and increased homelessness. I want to emphasize that when young people are not employed, they get very depressed. And also when they get depressed, we see them taking drugs. In the city where I come from, Pietermaritzburg, homelessness is at a very high rate. You find a lot of young people who are taking drugs. They call them amapara. Why do we have so many people who are homeless? It's because they don't have jobs. It's because the economy is declining. It's a sign that the state is failing us as the young people. These are my recommendations to this. In addressing this crisis, this issue of energy must be at the top of the agenda. Also, so the South African government must utilize long-term, evidence-based and sustainable planning and decision-making. South African government must invest in skill development and build the needed capacity to convert the natural resources into energy at a larger scale. By this, we do acknowledge and recognize that we cannot rely only on ESCOM. We need alternatives. Invest in technology advancements to enable the country to explore other alternative sources of energy. Use its natural resources such as water, wind, and the sun. In conclusion, I'm afraid that if this crisis is not addressed, experienced by the youth of today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thembelihle. Thank you so much for your thoughts. And really, there are some pockets and gems that I think, these are some of the things that we can think about, especially when we're going to the Q&A session. She spoke largely on the impact and the fact that, the energy crisis is something that impacts our daily lives, particularly the state of young people. We speak about mental illness, we speak about unemployment, and in one way or the other, the energy crisis does affect the state of young people and impact their day-to-day lives. Anyway, all right, so now we are going to move on to our second speaker, and our second speaker is going to be Itumeleng. Itumeleng Motlabane is a social activist who centers the working class black woman and youth through her work. She works as the Eastern Cape head of province at the South African Democratic Youth Movement Equal Education. She's also a youth sounding board member for the European Union, where she advises the Commissioner for International Partnerships on meaningful youth participation in global policies. Her thematic has been inclusion and diversity, where she advocates for women and the LGBTQIA community, persons with disability, and indigenous youth. She has acquired a degree in Bachelor of Commerce at the University of Fort Hare and has various certificates in community leadership. She has been awarded in 2023 as the top outstanding young persons in South Africa by the Junior Chamber International. She continues to use her experiences to drive ideas in her advocacy, community organizing, and policy reform. Help me welcome Itumeleng.
Molweni, I'm sure you've heard that my name is Itumeleng already. But my perspective on today's discussion is going to be based on what I do, which is community organizing, the interactions that I have with learners every single day at Equal Education, but also I also organize outside of Equal Education, and so how do I bring in those experiences and what people are feeling? And it brings me just to my drive here. I got here a bit late because of there's no robot that's working in Motherwell. And I was staying in Warmer Heights at a B&B there, and my way to Motherwell was quite easy because all the robots were working. And on my way back in Motherwell, they were not working. What I'm trying to show you is that this energy crisis, like any other thing in South Africa, is felt through the lens of inequality. Not all of us are feeling the energy crisis in the same degree. So it depends in terms of how much money you have and where you are placed, right? And I want to center education as my site of struggle for our conversation now. Learners that are in working class communities that go to public schools tend to feel the consequence of the energy crisis more than learners that are in more suburban places that have alternatives. And I think that is the crux of why we are here and its impact and why it's exacerbated in working class communities. So I think one of the worst things about South Africa is that its spatial planning places the poorer you are in the more peripheral parts of the communities and towns that people are placed. And so in those communities and villages, that is where the energy crisis is most felt. But I think one of the things that struck me as I was preparing for this is that even before the energy crisis, 2,311 schools here in the Eastern Cape didn't have electricity anyway. So it tells you that it's not just a crisis that is felt ngendlela efanayo to everyone. And it's important that we note that, and we note that the people that are losing out the most are the people who are in the working class. And also, I think one of the things that we need to also look at is the fact that out of the 5,300 schools and some odds that we have in the Eastern Cape, only 578 have computer access. And so that means that even with or without load shedding, we still are in a crisis. And it then means that load shedding is one of the many symptoms of a decaying state, and that is because of one thing that my colleague has already mentioned, which is lack of political will, maladministration within state-owned enterprises. We've seen it with Eskom, PRASA, SAA. We see it with the post office as well. So this is not a unique case. That is why when I propose solutions, I will propose on how to deal with the political that will enable us to translate it into what we see in the SOEs. But before that, part of the biggest impact that we've seen is on women, and it would not do justice if we don't genderize also this conversation. Because women and people of LGBTQIA communities, as soon as the lights go off in a community, we know that there are risks of gender-based violence there. We know that things like corrective rape starts happening at a much higher rate than they would. And unfortunately, we know the statistics that says electronics have across the world saved a lot of women from a lot of labor. So it means that when you then remove that aspect with this energy crisis, it subjects women to much more labor than they would on an ordinary day, and that needs to be taken into account, particularly by employers, but also people who expect of us in the same way that they would expect of men. So I think we also need to be able to look at this in a gender lens. I don't want to speak most on post-school youth because I think my colleague has done justice in speaking about how unemployment and the inability and the further shredding of jobs by a lot of companies has disadvantaged young people, and it has contributed quite severely to mental health. But also, I think it's important that we also look at teaching and learning in special schools heavily depends on having energy, particularly consistent energy, because a lot of special schools, their LTSM is quite linked to having electricity. And when you don't, it means that the funds in those special schools are redirected to making sure that they find alternatives for the energy crisis. What that does is that it actually gives in much more fees that parents have to put in. They call them voluntary contributions, but they never voluntary, they enforce them. And so what that does is that it excludes a poor black learner who is living with disabilities from being able to access education in the same way that a person, that other learners would. And I think that this causes then, when you look at the education, because in education, unfortunately, is that when you lose 2022 and 2023, your ability to give maximum teaching and learning, you might not be able to make up for that time. And so what happens is that when the learners leave high school, they might have missed out on some of the teaching and learning that they were supposed to get, and that can give us a dangerous deficit of skills, particularly for those that go to public schools, and further exacerbate the inequalities that we see. So I think for me, and this is quite a simplified thinking, but it it feels like there is a lot of collapse of all the state-owned enterprises, and further exacerbating what we see as a neoliberal state, where the state is spending less on social justice cause, but is rather bailing out ESCOM, bailing out what. And those, for me, are further exacerbating the interest of those that are in private. But now, then the question becomes, how do we deal with this collective hopelessness that we see in our communities, that we see in the education, that we see? Because the people that we need to also think about, the mama in the taxi, when you go, oh, lendo yombane, and then everyone starts a chaos, right? Because it's a real and it's felt, and it's causing quite distress in our communities. And that's why I propose that we need to organize ourselves as young people. I don't have any other solution except for what I do every day. I think that if we conscientize ourselves of the things that we're going through and why is it that they're happening and the impact in the future, then we are able to build our own, what I call personal manifestos, where we are going to a big thing next year. I can never not include that in our thinking, where we are thinking about who do we vote for, who do we give power in the coming election. We think about people who will be able to fix and give us alternatives, not just spoken alternatives, but proven leadership. And I think that that is quite important. But I also think that we must be able to monitor these commitments that the government makes to us as communities, because a lot of communities aren't able to follow up on some of the small commitments that happen through IDPs and through other proposals that different departments make to communities. And I think that if we follow what government is doing and is saying to us as communities, and we hammer on accountability, then we stand a chance on making sure that the energy crisis is also something that is addressed, even if it's to a limited extent. But as communities, we must also propose our own solutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Itumeleng. I think there's so much to think through in terms of your contribution, but I think the one thing I picked up is that we cannot think about the energy crisis outside the lens of inequality. And I think also just load shedding is a symptom of a decaying state. I think those are such beautiful things that we could sit and really chew on and think about. You know, that load shedding is not an isolated issue, but it forms part of a broader contextual issue in South Africa of social inequality. But I'm not the speaker, I'm the facilitator, and let me do my job. The next speaker is going to be Chantal. Chantal Naledi Seriti is a devoted advocate for climate action and environmental sustainability, currently balancing her roles as an intern and a master's student. As a first Rand intern at the JNF Walter Sisulu Environmental Center, she actively engages students from grade 1 to 11, nurturing a profound connection to the environment and instilling a sense of responsibility for biodiversity conservation. Simultaneously pursuing her master's degree in sociology at Saltplaat University, her research delves deep into investigating adaptation strategies and the utilization of indigenous knowledge systems to address climate change challenges faced by the Namakwa community in the Northern Cape. Chantal's dedication extends to her role as a director of events and engagements for World Merit South Africa. Her recent leadership at Africa Climate Week, co-leading and presenting on the vital role of local climate action and global collaboration, underscores her commitment to shaping a sustainable future. Can you give a round of applause as Chantal comes in?
Good morning, everyone. Is it morning? Wow. Okay, it's actually night, guys. Yo, I'm tired. I'm joking. It's 5:30. Oh my gosh. Molweni, as you guys say. But if we were in my hood, Negadol Shodin Tang, right? So Shodin Tang. So my name is Chantal Naledi Seriti, but I go by Naledi as a preference, right? So I was listening to very phenomenal women speak about their work and how they've impacted our society and what great contributions they've made. It is lovely to share a panel with you. So, now, who is Chantel Naledi Siriti and what is her contribution to this discussion? So Chantel is a girl who grew up in Mamelodi, who studied in a local township school with no resources. And for some reason, you had to make it work. You had to figure out that the environment and issues of climate change were never a priority. You didn't have time to think about climate change. You didn't have time to think about whether or not today there's electricity because you either had to focus on school or you had chores to do, or sometimes there is no food in your belly. And those are the concerns of the people on the ground. It is very difficult to go and talk about climate change and discuss what it is and how it impacts you when, firstly, the first discussion has to be, did you guys eat today? And that is why the issue of climate change and the issue of energy then comes in. A lot of the times we talk about climate action, we talk about taking it from grassroots level and taking it internationally. But the concern that I always had was, what are we doing at a local level? People are dealing with serious issues. People are also, the people that are affected by climate change and the people that are affected and that need this just energy transition are the people on the ground. Because when climate change happens, when these floods happen, when the water crisis happens, they're the ones that are going to be mostly affected. They're the ones who are going to feel the brunt. They are the people on the ground. They are the people that have to deal with the consequences without resources. And that then made me realize I had to do something. I had to figure out how to navigate these spaces so that the narratives of the people are shared. So I decided that my place would be policy and the involvement of the youth within this policy space. And we then look at now the work that has been happening and how the just transition is mainly focused on ensuring that, ESCOM is not burdened, but how are we benefiting from it? A lot of youth are unemployed, a lot of youth do not have the skill. The just energy transition is happening, the need for green skills is happening. How are the youth being involved? How are the youth being included? So when I started working as an environmental education facilitator, one of the key things that we had to teach kids in grade 7 was about energy. We had to figure out a way to teach them to understand the importance of renewable energy, to understand why there is a need to shift away from fossil fuel to renewable energy sources. Because to them, they just want to see the lights on. They just want to watch TV. Whether it comes from coal or whether it comes from water or from nuclear, it doesn't matter to them. And so, how are we including the youth in the policy space? The youth are significant stakeholders. They play very crucial roles in the sense that they know what's going on. They are on the ground, they are the activists, they are the ones that are consistently aware of what the challenges are. Not only that, but they're the ones that want to change. They're the ones that want a better society for themselves, because we are the leaders of tomorrow, right? So we want to lead this beautiful and brighter, sustainable tomorrow. So how are we doing that? How are we doing that when the youth enter into these policy spaces and they're already experiencing challenges? When I first heard of the JETP and I heard of the partnership with the European Union, with Germany, with the UK, and this partnership that would ensure that South Africa is moving towards a low carbon economy, it seemed like something that we would all be benefiting from. But where is the just part? You know, yeah, it's a transition. It's an energy transition, but where is the just part? How are we ensuring that the youth are benefiting? How are we ensuring that the workers are benefiting? How are we ensuring that the suppliers and the communities that are going to be affected are actually benefiting from this process? Those are the questions that I constantly ask myself. Those are the questions that are on the thoughts of young people, because they are dealing with the issues. We are all dealing with the issues. Climate change is here. Climate change, we are constantly seeing it. The floods that are happening, the fact that there's too much water somewhere else, there's no water in Johannesburg. You know, if we're still dealing with that, this drought, it's a semi-arid area where the youth are affected, indigenous communities are affected. And then how do we navigate these spaces? How do we ensure that all the voices of the people are included in this conversation? When I went to Africa Climate Week and my presentation was on the role of the youth in climate action at a grassroots level, my intention was to show that the youth are already moving, the youth are already active on the ground. It may not seem like paramount work, it may not seem, because it's one step at a time and they're moving that way and they're pushing without these resources, but nevertheless they're moving and they're pushing and they're doing the work. So then, how do we ensure that the youth are having these opportunities, right? So, what is the energy transition, and how are the youth being involved, and how are the youth, being included in the policy process? Youth have been considered significant stakeholders. Activists have called for inclusion and active participation in the policy making. 40% of South Africa contributes 40% of carbon dioxide emission. And what that means is that in comparison to other African countries, our economy is carbon-centered. What that means is that once we move away from coal emission, what happens to the societies, what happens to the communities that have already been working and mining this coal? How are they included? How are they upskilled? How are they reskilled to ensure that they are also benefiting from this transition? And now Itumeleng made mention of women and how they are also going to be affected. Now, with policies such as one that will say that now state entities are no longer required to follow the BBE policy to choose, when it comes to choosing their subcontractors, what does that mean with youth and women-led enterprises? It means that they are then marginalized. It means that then state entities can choose who they want to work with. And then that means that we then solidify the idea that women and youth are not suitable to own companies, are not suitable to drive the economy, because the resources and the funds will not be going to them. How are we navigating these spaces? How is it that we are in a country that is consistently failing us? When we go to these conversations and we go to these PCC discussions and consultations, we are then coming across issues of barriers where now I have to deal and I have to go into these consultations and I don't know, there's language barrier issues, there's jargon barriers where I don't know and people don't know how to navigate the policy space, because let's look at the state of the education in our country. Our education does not equip us to move beyond grade 12. Once you have your grade 12, the skills that you have, you can't really use them in the real world. You can't use those skills. You don't have the necessary skills to move into the green economy. We realize that, yes, there is a need to include the youth in the policy space. However, we're not equipping the youth. The youth are already marginalized and they're already disenfranchised, because let's look at where these consultations are happening. They're happening in Sandton, and how many people actually have access to go to Sandton right now and have these consultations? How am I having a consultation when I'm unemployed and I'm hungry and I don't know where my next meal is? How are we prioritizing the youth? How is the government? I have so many questions, but I think that is why I went into policy. I went into policy because I realized there were so many questions that were there. There were so many questions that were not answered. And so how are we making sure that these questions are answered? So my recommendations is that we need to mainstream the youth. We need to include the youth in these spaces. We don't want the youth to be just part of one consultation. The youth need to be a part of the discussion. They need to be part of the whole policy process, and not just for one consultation where they're coming in and they're given these big, massive presentations with a lot of graphs, and they don't know what is happening, and the only thing that they can contribute to the discussion is to say, who is funding this? Because the youth have the potential to contribute so much more. Because yes, who is funding this? Is this a loan? Is this a grant? But we can better have a conversation when the youth is mainstreamed, when the youth are included, not just as a stakeholder, as part of like a tech where the youth are just said, oh no, we've already consulted the youth and that's it. Let's ensure that we are including the youth in every single part of the policy process. Let's make sure that for stakeholders to take immediate action, they are empowered with education. The youth is included in leadership. There is a need to prioritize the needs of the youth and to ensure that they are in every single space or every single part of the policy process. We need to ensure that whether it's a formal or informal engagement, the youth are already present and they are contributing fully. We need to ensure that there is equitable access to the productive resources, whether it be finances, technical knowledge, or entrepreneurial trainings. We need technical skills and business development for us to be able to contribute fully in the new coming green economy. There is a need to develop opportunities for the youth to enhance their technical knowledge and entrepreneurial skills. For us to ensure that there's an elevation of youth participation in sustainable energy, we need to ensure that it not only is a discussion, but it also benefits their career advancements. For us to be able, there is a need to disseminate knowledge, products, and reports and webinars so that the youth are consistently in touch with what is happening. There's also a need to ensure that there is diversity, gender equality, and women's empowerment. There's also a need to ensure that the impact is not only just sustainable, but it's diverse, impactful, and it is sustainable, not only with just state entities, but with NGOs and the private sector as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chantal. Thank you very, very much. I think just to take a snippet out of, your contribution, I think you focused very, very much on policy formulation and the importance of young people being part of the process of formulating policy. I think it's such a critical part that gets, lost in translation, but it's the key part in being able to ensure that we monitor and evaluate proper interventions in ensuring that we respond to the energy crisis. But, okay, we are going to now go to our last speaker, Mr. Thembaletu Nyikilana. Mr. Thembaletu Nyikilana holds a diploma in public management. He has served as part of UNASA's executive committee as its secretary. He was involved in student activism and has led the South African Student Congress, better known as SASCO, as its regional secretary. He's also been the regional spokesperson of the ANC Youth League, and he was elected to form part of the Nelson Mandela SRC first as its site rep at Mission Vale, and secondly as the SRC president. He has also formed part, or rather was the spokesperson of student parliament here at Nelson Mandela University. Help me welcome Mr. Thembaletu Ngila.
Thank you very much. If I knew how in-depth the panel that I was going to be with today, probably and I would have used the weekend in Gulus Pumaguyo or the weather as an excuse. But I think, firstly, I must thank the team from Kanrad and you, Prof, for reviving the discussions at Kanrad first. I think many of them that are part of your team now are a group of generation that I worked very closely with during my student activism days. And I was one of those who felt a little bit jealous when the university introduced Krishet, because I felt like it was taking the space of Kanrad away more from the university. But I'm happy that it's back, it's taking its space again in advancing discussions that affect our modern day democracy as well. And are picking on to topics that are less philosophical, but deal with the day-to-day challenges that we face as well. So I am happy about that, and I'm happy that we have a positive crowd today that woke up amidst the weather. People when it comes to your weather, Prof. There's a certain political organization that once contributed the loss of elections towards bad weather. So abantu baseBhayi banochuku kakhulu. It was a very difficult topic to deal with, Prof, particularly for me because I felt that it left me between a rock and a hard place. You run the risk of wanting to be too academic about it, or you fall into the trap of wanting to play political fullback when it comes to the issue of the energy crisis that we face in South Africa. So it was that quagmire that we faced when we were attempting to prepare. But probably mine would want to give an overview on the crisis of Eskom at hand and probably fall more on the technical side because I felt the urgency of saying that it's a crisis that is in now, and it is a crisis that we run the risk of having extreme views taking center stage of the implemented decisions as we speak. And I've seen a lot of youth movements, and Baker would agree with me, have sort of drawn us into this trap of wanting to attempt to forecast the energy crisis, but it is now, and want to give us solutions that will probably be implemented 10 years later, but the crisis is now. That is why you have people who want to say, tomorrow Baker march to the offices of public enterprise and say, stop the privatization of Eskom, but 6 months ago, the president had signed off on the electricity amendment bill that had already approved the independent power producers that would be supplementing the work that is being done by Eskom. So that is the challenge that we have, and it's important that institutions such as Kanrad come back into the space of saying that, whoa, leave the philosophical work to us, let us analyze it for you, but you need to be implementing at a policy position and at a practical level of government and its administration the solutions that we come about. I'll probably want to start with a very important quote, and it's interesting because I think two of my panelists touched on it as we go into next year. It's a quote from Nelson Mandela, and I quote, "Democracy will have very little content and will be indeed short-lived if we do not address our socio-economic problems within an expanding and growing economy," close quote. South Africa faces an urgent, multifaceted issue of energy and energy availability. This crisis is compounded by the collapse of Eskom, acts of sabotage and corruption, and their devastating impact on our energy sector and economy. Moreover, it is imperative to explore the importance of a diversified energy mix, drawing comparisons to successful countries that have effectively utilized both renewable energy and coal. And many of my colleagues would be surprised of why probably I sound as an advocacy of coal whilst I'm in the space of renewable energy and EGS. But I'm not an advocate of coal, but rather I'm an advocate of understanding South Africa's economy and its backbone and the importance of, because we have this obsession, Prof, of wanting to over-legislate ourselves and implementing policy positions of developed nations, being oblivious to the fact that we're a developing country. Eskom has faced significant financial difficulties, mounting debt, aging infrastructure, As the end of the fiscal year in 2020, Eskom debt stood at a staggering 464 billion rands. This financial burden has severely limited Eskom's capacity to invest in upgrading power plants, improving transition networks. The consequences are evident in the frequent blackouts. However, Eskom's challenges, and I agree with all three of my panelists, Eskom challenges are not solely financial. Acts of sabotage and corruption have further undermined the energy sector and our economy. Deliberate attempts to disrupt our energy infrastructure inflicted significant harm on Eskom's operations, further strained the grid. These acts not only put a strain on our energy system, but also target the stability and the prosperity of our nation. It is crucial that we tackle corruption head-on, safeguard our energy infrastructure, and ensure that funds allocated to the sector are utilized to benefit all South Africans. Successful countries that have implemented a diversified energy mix, effectively incorporating both renewable energy sources and coal. One notable example of those countries is Germany. And it's a crazy philosophy, Prof, because when they arrive at the G20 summit, they'll say South Africa must speed up its transition process and move to cleaner and safer energy. But they're upping up their loading of our own coal when it comes to exports and importing coal. And you ask yourselves that, who is responsible for the rapid global warming and climate challenges, and why are the same victims of this phenomenon being the ones who are being persecuted on dropping carbon emissions? Because Africa is one of the most underdeveloped continents. They have the least contribution towards industrialization and the increase in carbon emissions. The true criminals on the matter are the ones who are telling us to speedily migrate from the same energy sources that they saw as an important step in industrializing through the first, the second, and the third industrial revolution. But because they are ready to gear up towards the fourth industrial revolution and further contributing towards carbon emissions through the 4G and the 5G improvement of technologies, are saying that we must drop. So it is it's a double victimization of Africa and developing countries to the first world countries. The second most successful country within incorporating these energy mixes has been Japan. Leverages renewable energy sources alongside coal, while the country is actively transitioning to cleaner energy solutions. It continues to rely on a coal-pot energy mix. This balanced approach ensures that the secure energy supply supports job creation, sustains economic growth. When addressing the South African energy crisis, it is important to acknowledge that a complete migration away from coal may not be the most viable solution at this moment. Coal remains a significant contributor to our economy. The coal mining sector directly employs over 82,000 people and an additional 170,000 jobs supported through indirect employment. Furthermore, coal plays a vital role in our export market, generating essential revenue for our country. To solve the energy crisis, we must pursue a careful, planned, and managed energy mix that prioritizes renewable energy sources, responsible coal usage, and the development of clean coal technologies. This approach will ensure that we redress the environmental concerns while also considering that the needs and well-being of those affected by the energy transition by doing so. We can develop a sustainable and inclusive energy system that supports economic growth and job creation and a prosperous future for all South Africans. I think in conclusion, the South African energy crisis requires our immediate attention. The collapse of Eskom, acts of sabotage, and corruption all pose a significant threat to our energy sector and economy. By drawing inspiration from successful countries like Germany and Japan, we can develop a comprehensive and diversified energy mix that combines renewable energy sources with the responsible usage of coal. This approach will enable us to address the environmental concerns, support job creation, and ensure that a just transition for workers. It is imperative that we tackle corruption head-on to safeguard our energy infrastructure and allocate funds transparently and build a sustainable future for all. And I think as I conclude on that, Prof, it is important that as we move towards a just energy transition, there is a social understanding of the fact that upskilling of the youth is imperative. The last global competency report proved that we are a least skilled generation if we are compared to that of our parents. And it is important that as we migrate towards cleaner and safer energy, young people are at the center of it. It's a beautiful project that has started in Gauteng, but it must not only stop with installation of solar panels, because it is another problem that we're going to face as these projects expand, Prof, is that we're going to have an oversimplification of the issue of moving towards greener and safer energy, of trying to SMME the project and have small businesses fight over roof space without a complex understanding of how do we properly transition into greener energy. And therefore, at the center of transitioning must not commit the same atrocities we did when it came to construction and other businesses that we started developing, but we must focus on poverty alleviation through skill and business incorporation. So we must not commit the same mistakes, Prof, of wanting to have SMMEs fight over roof spaces, everyone wants to install solar, but there must be a deeper philosophical understanding of the fact that when we transition into safer and greener energy, it does not mean if we're in construction, you must now move and go and invest in solar panels and find a cheaper supplier in Asia. But there must be a deeper understanding of the fact that we are not ready to completely migrate from coal, and also at the center of it must be the issue of reskilling, upskilling, and poverty alleviation through electrification. Because like they say in the UN, every crisis presents an opportunity, and even in this one, South Africa has an opportunity to move itself out fruitfully. Thank you very much, Prof.
Okay, all right. Yes, okay. Thank you so much, Tara, for your contributions. I think I liked your sign off that says every crisis presents an opportunity, for innovation. So I think that's where we are. And I think you spoke a lot about over legislation. I think that's something very critical to think about, that as South Africa, we're known to have the best policies, the best legislations. But how far are we in actually practicing and making sure the praxis of those legislations are happening in our day-to-day lives? But like I said, I am the facilitator, not the speaker. So we've come to the very exciting part now, the engagement part, which is the question and answers. Luckily, we don't need roaming mics in this room. So I am going to pick hands, right? And we just need comments, we just need questions, anything that you just want to ask. We have, skilled young people in various ways who have really, really thought through this issue of the energy crisis. I see some young people in the room, and yeah, I'll take just one round for now, and then if we do have space for more, I will entertain further. All right, are there any young people? Can I see some hands? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, in that order. Okay.
Thank you. Kamong Lonwabo, surname is Hams. I'm a student at the university. I probably have only one question, because Diana's police. The question I want to ask now is that, and probably addressed to the latter speaker, is, as a country, how prepared or how ready are we for a migration to greener energy at an infrastructural level and also at a labor force level? Understanding, of course, the assumption would be that the green energy project will need some level of skilled labor. Now, with our labor force, where is it seen in that parameter of a skilled labor force, and how prepared are we to migrate towards a greener energy project? So that's my question. Thanks.
Captured. Thank you. Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you very much. Igama lami Gold Maseti. I'm a student at the university. I think I have a question for Tembelihle. Are we perhaps facing a challenge, a leadership crisis at ESCOM? I'm asking this because at some point, when Brian Molefe was CEO of ESCOM, we did not have load shedding. We had total load shedding, no load shedding, sorry, for 3 years. And then shortly after that, he was obviously ousted, and then someone else came in, and then load shedding. So could it be a leadership crisis? Because he further says at the State Capture Commission that the problems that people are citing at ESCOM aren't really the problem, because he says ESCOM is more than capacitated to bring energy to the country, just that what they need to do is to service all the existing power stations and to make sure that there's due diligence in maintaining those buildings. So is it a leadership crisis, is it an infrastructural crisis, or is it generally a mix of those two things? Thank you.
Thank you. Gentlemen?
Thank you very much. My question still goes to Tembeletu, I mean to say, Comrade President. I would just like to pose and just put my view that South Africa has become very sensitive to global opinions more than what is happening in the country. I mean, the previous speakers mentioned it very well that you can't address one societal problem in alienation to another. You can't address load shedding in alienation from inequality, poverty, and so on. So my question to you is very simple, is that what is your conjecture or opinion rather on the position the government should be taking in this particular time in order for them to alleviate or tackle this current predicament? Because I mean, it's been 30 years. 30 years of democracy, 30 years of power. Thank you very much, President.
Thank you. Gentlemen? Who you first, and then Bongani.
No, thank you very much, Comrade President and Sis Naledi. I think that the comment that I'm going to make is, I would like just both of your opinions on it, yeah? Because you spoke about similar issues. Naledi spoke about the just energy transition, and then Utera spoke about the North and South divide that is happening globally. So, Tara, we absolutely agree that the Northern Hemisphere are the ones that are the perpetrators in this issue. Your countries that are in the North, they produce the most amount of CO2. And then on an adverse level, it becomes the sub-Saharan Africa that gets the short end of the stick, right? Because a lot of our people are not only reliant on your traditional means of producing energy, but they're also reliant on your traditional means of producing food as well. We are a nation or a region that is mostly reliant on your agrarian ways of producing food. And as a result, it becomes difficult for us when things of climate change are hitting sub-Saharan Africa, and it becomes difficult for us to adapt, right? So my question then becomes, how can we not only look at it from a South African perspective, but at a regional level as well? And how do you put these questions to the African Union, to the United Nations, and how do we come up with a formidable solution that will not only speak unto South Africa, but to the whole region as well? And how do we get these leaders to unite? Thank you.
Thank you. Bongani?
Greetings to the House. My name is Bongani Mumuti. I just want to draw lessons from Cuba, how Cuba survived its peak oil crisis. I'll be short and brief. After it was sanctioned post the Soviet Union collapsing. So Cuba was sanctioned by the US. It cut its oil supplies, and Cuba went into a political crisis which affected and impacted its economy. And how Cuba resuscitated itself there, because they were experiencing on a day about 18 hours of load shedding or power cuts per day. And they embarked on a community project where every facet of the economy, leaders of Cuba assessed which parts of the economy could be most stimulated, which would then drive the development and resuscitation of the oil or energy crisis. There was a communal approach where agriculture was identified. Spaces such as infrastructure were turned into agricultural spaces. The generation then of that practice or praxis, it then stimulated economic development, which was injected towards the development and resuscitation of the oil crisis. So I think more than anything else, the crisis that we are in as well, there are a lot of lessons that could be drawn from how Cuba resuscitated itself. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. What's that? Oh, okay. We'll just take, because it's a high school student, we will give you the grace. Yes, sir.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Bongani Boy. I'm studying, I'm attending school there by Kwezilomso. I just want to comment about South Africa. South Africa is not very independent, as individuals. You see, we're not fully awakened in our minds. It's not South Africans' fault that everything is like this. There are reptilians, supremes. There was a king of England who sent his son Alexander to learn about alchemy, astronomy. He came here and he learned about those things. And he found this book that has a 360 of knowledge, and wisdom, And he came back to England, showing his father. And that book, it has spells that can cast, people to get lower vibration. As South African, there are many of us who are living in those lower vibration frequencies. You see, those people, they forged a cross, which has 180 degrees lower vibration frequencies, so that people, they don't cooperate well. Like I could say, like in their minds, they don't have innovative ideas, to actually solve problems. There was an ant. He found the ant. There's this woman who's a scientist.
Sorry?
She.
Sorry, sir.
She attracted. There's this
Excuse me?
woman who found the ant.
2 minutes, ne?
Okay.
Yeah.
She attracted energy. She get free energy from the universe by just having the ant and just manifest, that energy, from the universe. It's very odd, even for me, to kind of explain it. You see, they say, I've noticed that many people, the
Sorry,
government.
I don't mean to interrupt, but we need to get to the question because of time. Okay?
There's no question, but I just want to add that, we as people of South Africa, we are not fully conscious about what's happening in our country. There's food, resources that have been taken under our noses, but we are just standing there. We're not doing anything about it,
All right. Can we, Stalinzolo. Okay, thank you so much for your contribution. All right. Okay, so now, you can switch off your mic for me.
Okay,
Thank you so much. All right. Young, bright minds. Okay. Young, bright minds. Confidence. Okay, so now we're going to give just a chance for our panelists to respond to some of the questions. I know that, fortunately or unfortunately, a lot were directed to Tara, but if there's a question or a comment that you want to sort of add on to the rest of the panelists, we can do that as well. So I'll start with Tara, because there was quite a few. Lonwabo speaking about how prepared are we to move. Did you capture all of them? Okay, then that's fine. So we'll give Tara, and then just like that, you don't even have to come stand here, you can speak from there.
All right, thanks. Hopefully I've captured all of them properly. How ready are we for an energy migration? We're not. That's the first one. Why are we not? I think there are a number of issues why we're not. I think one, we first need to determine of how do we go about our just energy transition first, and what then comprises of our energy mix. And that is something that we first need to arrive at. You have the advocacy of nuclear forming part of our energy mix. When you talk nuclear, and I think Baker would agree with me, you then begin to temper with an issue of national sovereignty that then comes into the picture. And when you enter that discussion, it's a potential discussion that has precedents overthrown when you talk about a nuclear mix when it comes to energy. Secondly, if you just look at our example now in terms of national power utility, none of our plants are performing optimally. Even the recent investment, since the beginning of the Medupi and the Kusile project, it has continuously suffered from mismanagement, constant bailing out. We've effectively, Prof, never gotten the opportunity to cut the ribbon at such a massive investment of those power plants. Really, it's like building a house and never getting the opportunity to put the roof on and moving into it. So we're definitely not ready, both at an infrastructural level, at an implementation level, as well as a workforce level. So it's only now that we've started moving, and even there, opinions are so all over the place. I saw people saying that when there was an announcement of one of our power plants being converted into the first part of the transition program of upskilling our workforce, moving towards the just energy transition, people said that the minister is privatizing ESCOM. I was like, but that power plant was closed already. They're not shutting down anything. They're just using it to reskill the workforce, because effectively when it was shut down, the workforce there was never retrenched. They were just absorbed back into and were taken onto a reskilling program. So half of the country was, especially us on Twitter, we were up in arms saying that they've started shutting down our plants, they are privatizing ESCOM. And I was like, but that plant was never open. It's been shut down. So we're definitely not ready. And I think it's about well, you see, in South Africa we have this thing. We are jack of all trades and master of none. Yeah. So we need to get to a part where we choose something, stick with it, invest in it, and make sure that we become the best in it so that we can export it. So that is the crisis that we face, even with this transition program. It's going to be futile if we're going to approach the energy mix if it means that we must import labor for it. You know, you start a solar panel project, and it means you must invite the Asians to come and camp for 3 years in South Africa until the project is off the ground, and stick around for another year or two, and when they leave, it's dead again. So that's the risk that we run. So no, we're definitely not ready, and that is why I think many people are very passionate and are saying that no to migration of coal, but let's introduce a just energy mix and transition progressively into cleaner and safer energy. And I think the second question is, what is my opinion in the conjunction of at a government level and the crisis that we face here today? Government has spent more than 2 decades bailing out ESCOM instead of contributing power to the grid. and I think that can be my most basic answer to it, is that there's no amount of progressive policy positioning, microeconomy, you know, when people say, neoliberal economic positions in South Africa, wara, wara. You can't grow any economy without having electricity. It's just that basic. So we've spent more than 2 decades investing, bailing out ESCOM without contributing power to the grid. And the rapid shift needs to start there. You must cut the umbilical cord and start investing in projects that you can yield results in. Because if I bail you out for mismanagement of funds, and I do it again, it's insanity, you know. You keep on changing the board, you keep on changing the CEO, but you keep on bailing them out. It tells you that it's not the person there that's the problem. It's the entire system, and therefore you need systematic change to address it. And then I think the last one is, what can we do to address the North and South Pole at a regional level? I think one of the biggest issues that we have, Baker, and it's probably a discussion that will continue with it, is that since the collapse of the African peer review mechanism in Africa, it's been almost impossible for policy advocacy on anything. We could be talking about which country's tea do we use. It's almost impossible to find each other at a regional block since the collapse of the African peer review mechanism. And we're going to see it further now with the conflict in Niger and in the ECOWAS region. We're going to be pulling in different directions simply because the Western Bloc is whispering in African leaders' ears again. You know, disease from that nonsense will assist you with your agricultural project, you know. Cyril, please, man, move away from that thing so that we can quickly attend to your energy and load shedding issue, you know, at a fiscal level. And that's the problem that we have. So it needs, and unfortunately, the African Union, same as the UN, they don't have the power to overreach. It's purely on advocacy. So hopefully, if we start introducing teeth into the AU, then probably we can make strides in terms of how do we then take a regional decision as an African bloc, and how do we put each other accountable for that decision, and what becomes then the consequences of those who don't want to toe the line. So I think the first part of it is let's bring back the African peer review mechanism. It must come back with a little bit of teeth. And then we see from, and the free Africa trade as well. Let's start solidifying ourselves internally, and then we can probably look at what then becomes our stance when it comes to Europe and other countries. Thanks.
Thank you so much. All right. And then Chantal, anything, and also just closing remarks, because I've been duly informed that this was all the appetite that we could entertain because of time. All right. Chantal, closing remarks and just last comments?
Okay. Technically, I wasn't ready to speak because, I mean, he said a mouthful. What do you say after that? I mean, I've been nodding to each and every single point because I concur. I generally agree with a lot of what he says. But I think just for closing remarks, it's important to ensure that the just transition is not leaving anybody behind. It's important that when we are investing in the just transition, we don't just invest in one type of energy. We need to exhaust all forms of energy. The Lesotho Highlands project is one of them. We need to use that water. Energy is not just solar versus coal. We need to diversify. We need to ensure that, as he said, we need to choose one thing, stick to it, master it, and export it. That is what it is at the end of the day. We need to ensure that the youth are not left behind. We need to ensure that these communities that are providing jobs and, you know, extended jobs as well, they are also upskilled, they are provided for, and long-term purposes. We're not talking about, because it's a 2050 project, but if you look at what's going to happen in 2050, we're probably going to be looking at this JP partnership and thinking, oh, you know what we should have done, oh, what we should have done. There's nothing that we can do. As for the global south and the north divide, we need to ensure that the intellectual property belongs to South Africa. That is the only way we're going to ensure sovereignty, and that is the only way we're going to grow ourselves. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chantal. One sentence, Tembelihle.
Thank you very much, Program Director. I would like to appeal to everyone in this room today, especially the young people, to take the center stage in solving our problems. Let us not be at the back. Let us take the front seat. Let us take the steering and drive our own future. South Africa is, what is happening today has a direct impact of the future that we are going to live in and the future that we are going to pass to our kids. We do not want to inherit a state that is a failure. Thank you.
Thank you. And Itumeleng.
Thank you, Program Director. I think mine follows just what Tembelihle has just said, that it would be a missed opportunity if we as young people would not get involved in trying to find alternatives to this energy crisis. And so I think that we must use our own voices to bring alternatives to the center and the main conversations that happen around this energy crisis.
Of course. Okay, all right. We have now come to the part of our program where we call none other than Ms. Nancy Msibi, who is the project manager for CAS, and she'll be doing just announcements of upcoming activities and also the vote of thanks. Can we give her a round of applause as she comes up?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much, Program Director, but unfortunately, I don't have any announcements to make. I just want to say thank you very much to our panelists. I mean, I can listen to you for the whole day. You really gave us insightful information which we'll carry home. Yes, I work for the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. For those who don't know about CAS, it's a German political foundation. We fund programs on the promotion of democracy, promotion of the rule of law, and strengthening good governance. And we also have scholarships for master's students in humanities. The scholarship is tied with an internship program at the South African Institute of International Affairs at WITS. With regards to today's discussion, as CAS, we really appreciate our partnership with Conrad because, like Prof. Becky said, it gives us an opportunity to have sessions with young people like yourselves where you have opportunities to debate. In most cases, you find that discussions are being held about issues that affect young people, but then young people are not in the room. So sessions like this really, we are very proud of the partnership and we would really like to continue working with Conrad, especially because of the platform that we get to speak to young people, not only the university students, but also the high school learners. So thank you very much to Professor Becky. CAS is a strong advocate for the promotion of an active, engaged, and responsible citizenry. Engaged citizens are able to make a difference in their communities by speaking up where they see wrongdoing, but also they can act within the confines of the law. We have a disturbing tendency in South Africa where you find that people are protesting against lack of electricity, but then they go and ban the school, they ban property. Then you wonder, how is that helping you solve your problem? So responsible citizens are those that will stand up and say, yes, we have issues, but banning property is not helping us. It's actually taking us 10 steps backwards. We have elections, upcoming elections next year, like Itumele mentioned. So for those of you who are able to vote, you have a responsibility. A French philosopher by the name of Joseph de Maistre said, every nation has a government it deserves, meaning that if you don't want to exercise your right to vote, you complain about this current government, you complain about load shedding, who knows? Maybe next year this time you'll still be complaining about load shedding. Because when some people go out to choose the government they want, you are sitting at home. You don't want to go and stand in a queue. I would like to thank Prof. Becky and the Conrad team, Setu, Rodney, and everyone who was involved in organizing this event, and our panelists, our facilitator, but most importantly, I would like to thank everyone who's in this room. Because if you guys were not here, we wouldn't be able to have this discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Can we give one round of applause, one more round of applause to our panelists and everyone that was involved? All right. Yeah, so this is officially the closure. Thank you so much for your participation and coming. Your favorite part, refreshments are outside. Refreshments are outside. There's plenty. Please make sure that you order, comrades. Order, comrades. Please ensure that you do so respectfully, and there's plenty, and Setu has made sure that we will leave full. All right. Okay. All right. Thank you for coming, and till we meet next time.